Why was she in that conference room at 5:46 in the morning, alone with a weapon that could stop an armored vehicle from nearly 2 miles away? Admiral Garrett Brennan hadn't expected anyone to be there. He'd specifically chosen this hour because silence was something he'd earned after 3 decades of sending warriors into places they might never return from. 62 years old, silver hair that used to be dark brown, a face carved by decisions that still woke him at night, 3 stars on his collar representing blood, sweat, and the kind of weight that never quite leaves your shoulders. He'd commanded SEAL teams through Desert Storm, run task forces in Bosnia, overseen operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The conference room on the third floor of Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters was supposed to be empty. He'd reserved it precisely because no one else would be foolish enough to be working at 0:30 on a Thursday morning. But the door was ajar. Light spilled into the hallway. His first thought was security breach. His second was to identify the threat before calling it in. What he found made him stop in the doorway and question everything he thought he knew about who belonged in this building at this hour. A woman he'd never seen before sat at the conference table. In front of her, spread across the surface in perfect geometric arrangement, was an M107 Barrett 50 caliber anti-material rifle, completely disassembled, barrel assembly positioned at 12 o'clock, bolt carrier group at 3, recoil spring mechanism at 6, trigger assembly at 9. Every single component laid out with surgical precision, positioned exactly where it should be for maximum efficiency during reassembly. Her hands moved with unconscious expertise, cleaning each part with the kind of focused attention that spoke of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory that came from years, not months. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge the 3 stars on his collar or the authority that came with them, just continued her work with an intensity that made the rest of the world seem like it was moving underwater. Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves, late 20s, athletic build, dark blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it looked painful, standard Navy working uniform with no distinguishing patches or indicators of specialized training. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than another intelligence analyst or administrative specialist. Except for the 50 caliber sniper rifle, she was field stripping like she could do it blindfolded in a sandstorm. Brennan had been around Barrett rifles his entire career. He'd authorized their use in dozens of operations, watched master snipers work with them in every environment from Arctic conditions to desert heat. The M107 was 32 pounds of precision, engineering capable of hitting targets at ranges that defied belief. It was also notoriously complex, with a recoil system and barrel assembly that required expert knowledge to properly maintain. This woman was disassembling it with casual efficiency that would have made any weapons instructor weep with joy. Her hands moved in smooth sequence, bolt disassembly with 3 precise movements, barrel removal with a practiced twist, trigger group separation executed flawlessly, each motion economical and exact, no wasted movement, no hesitation. But what caught Brennan's attention, what made him study the rifle more carefully, was the accurizing work on the barrel. Someone had hand-lapped the bore and modified the crown with techniques that hadn't been standard procedure in 30 years. Cold War-era sniper craft that the computer age had abandoned. "Who the hell are you?" Brennan asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded warriors through 3 decades of warfare. The woman's hands paused for exactly 1 second before continuing their work. She didn't startle, didn't jump, didn't show any of the reactions most junior personnel displayed when a 3-star admiral appeared unexpectedly. "Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves, sir, intelligence specialist attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Her voice was calm, professional, with a slight accent that suggested Oklahoma or Texas roots. "I apologize for the unauthorized use of the conference room. I needed a clean space for weapons maintenance and thought at this hour. That's an M107, Brennan interrupted, gesturing at the disassembled rifle. Intelligence specialists don't typically carry 50 caliber sniper systems, and that's not standard military accurizing work on that barrel. No, sir, they don't. Reeves set down the cleaning rod she'd been using on the barrel assembly and came to something resembling attention. This is personal equipment. I maintain it on my own time. Personal equipment. Brennan's tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. You're telling me you privately own a 50 caliber anti-material rifle that costs more than most cars, and you just happen to be cleaning it in a JSOC conference room at 0:30. Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm telling you. The audacity of it almost made Brennan smile. Almost. He moved closer to the table, studying the weapon components with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. The barrel showed wear patterns consistent with high round count. The bolt face had been modified with aftermarket parts that improved reliability in extreme conditions. The scope, a Schmidt and Bender 5-25 by 56, was worth more than the rifle itself. This wasn't a collector's piece. This was a working tool that had seen extensive operational use. And that accurizing work on the barrel, Brennan continued, those hand-lapping marks and crown modifications. I've seen that technique exactly once before. Grenada, 1983. My spotter used those same methods on his rifle before a shot that set records. He paused, letting that sink in. Where'd you learn to strip a Barrett? YouTube, sir. Reeves' expression remained perfectly neutral. YouTube. Lots of tutorial videos. Complete bullshit. Now she did smile just slightly. Yes, sir, but I thought I'd try the easy lie first before we got into the complicated truth. Brennan found himself liking her despite the irregularity of the situation. There was something refreshing about someone who didn't immediately grovel or make excuses when caught in an awkward position. Start talking, Lieutenant, and this time try the truth. Reeves glanced at the conference room door, then back at the Admiral. Sir, with respect, the truth is classified at a level that requires. I have every clearance that exists in the U.S. military, Brennan cut her off. Try again. She considered this for a moment, weighing options with visible calculation. Then she made a decision that would change both their careers. Marine Scout Sniper School, 2018, top of my class, deployed to Syria with a force recon unit for 18 months, transitioned to a JSOC task force that doesn't appear on organizational charts, specialized in long-range interdiction of high-value targets in denied areas. She paused and Brennan saw something in her eyes, not pride, not boasting, just fact. And I was very, very good at it, sir. Brennan studied her with renewed intensity. If what she was saying was true, it raised about 100 new questions. The most obvious being why a sniper with that kind of operational background was now sitting behind a desk analyzing intelligence reports. Why the transfer to intelligence work? He asked. Because I made a shot that shouldn't have been possible, sir, and it scared people who make decisions about operational capabilities. Her voice carried no bitterness, just statement of fact. After that, they decided I was better suited for analysis than field work. What kind of shot? She looked at him for a long moment, calculating risk versus honesty. The kind that made people ask questions about what humans are actually capable of when they refuse to accept limitations. But she hadn't told him the full truth yet, and what she was hiding would make everything else seem ordinary. 3 weeks later, Brennan sat in his office reviewing Lieutenant Reeves' complete service record, the unredacted version that required his 3-star clearance to access. What he found didn't match the quiet intelligence specialist who'd been cleaning a rifle at dawn. Force recon deployment to Syria, 18 months in country. 73 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, multiple decorations for actions that would never appear in official records. Then, a single mission in Somalia that changed everything. The target had been a warlord coordinating attacks on UN peacekeepers. Intelligence placed him in a compound 2,690 meters from the only viable shooting position. The operation had been approved with backup plans including drone strike and direct action raid if the sniper shot proved impossible. Every ballistic calculator said it was impossible. The distance exceeded the effective range of the M107 by nearly 1,000 meters. Wind conditions were variable. Temperature differential between shooter position and target area created atmospheric instabilities that made precise calculation nearly impossible. The target would be visible for approximately 30 seconds during a scheduled meeting. The mission commander had authorized the attempt with zero expectation of success. Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves had made the shot on her first trigger pull. Center mass, confirmed elimination, mission complete. What terrified the analysts wasn't just that she'd made the shot. It was that her pre-mission calculations had been done with pencil and paper, using techniques that predated computer ballistics by decades. She'd studied dust patterns and vegetation movement to build a wind model, used temperature readings and visual observation to calculate atmospheric effects, employed mathematical formulas that most modern snipers didn't even know existed. And then she made a shot that computers said was impossible. The after-action review had been classified at the highest level, not because of the target, but because of what the shot represented. If one sniper could make calculations that exceeded computer capabilities, what did that mean for doctrine that relied entirely on technology? What did it mean for training programs that had abandoned old techniques in favor of digital tools? The questions made people uncomfortable, so they transferred her to intelligence work and hoped the problem would go away. But problems like Caitlin Reeves didn't go away. They just waited for someone to recognize what they represented. Brennan picked up his phone and called Master Chief Boone Callahan. Retired now, but still the best sniper Brennan had ever served with. "I need you to look at something," Brennan said when Callahan answered. "Something that's going to make you feel very old and very proud at the same time." "That sounds ominous." "Remember Grenada, that shot we made at 1,587 meters." "Remember it," Callahan laughed. "I still have nightmares about the wind call." "Why?" "Because I just found someone who made a shot at 2690, using the same techniques we used in 83. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, "That's not possible." "That's what the computer said. She did it anyway." She. Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves, late 20s, Marine Scout Sniper School graduate, currently wasting away in an intelligence billet because she made people uncomfortable. More silence. Then Callahan's voice carefully controlled, "What's her father's name?" The question caught Brennan off guard. "I don't know." "Why?" "Because there's only one way she learned those techniques. Someone taught her. Someone who knew the old craft. Someone who understood that computers are tools but mastery comes from something deeper." Brennan pulled up Reeves' personnel file, going back to family information. Father, Master Sergeant Wyatt Reeves, USMC, Scout Sniper, multiple combat deployments, killed in action Fallujah 2004. "Wyatt Reeves," Brennan said aloud, and heard Callahan's sharp intake of breath. "Jesus Christ, Wyatt's kid." "You knew him?" "Knew him?" Callahan's voice carried emotion that 3 decades of combat hadn't fully buried. "He was my student, best I ever trained. He could read wind like he was having a conversation with it, make calculations in his head that most guys needed computers for. He had a daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old last time I saw him. Caitlin." Brennan felt pieces clicking into place. "He taught her." "He must have, before Fallujah, passed forward everything we taught him." Callahan paused. We need to bring her in, test her properly, see what she really knows. She's supposed to be analyzing intelligence reports. And we're supposed to let talent like that rot behind a desk because it makes bureaucrats nervous. Callahan's voice carried the edge of someone who'd spent 40 years watching the military make stupid decisions. Get her to a range. Let me see what Wyatt's daughter can do. What happened next would prove whether old knowledge could survive in a world that believed technology had all the answers. The long-range facility at Quantico sat empty except for 3 people: Admiral Brennan, Master Chief Callahan, and Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves, who stood at the 2,000-meter line with her M17 Barrett and a growing sense that this wasn't a normal evaluation. Callahan studied her with intensity that made most people uncomfortable. He was 71 years old, built like weathered oak, with hands that still moved with unconscious precision when he handled weapons. He'd been the Navy's premier sniper instructor for 20 years before retirement, trained hundreds of shooters, seen thousands of shots. "Your father was one of my best students," Callahan said without preamble. "Wyatt Reeves, Force Recon. He could make shots that defied explanation." Reeves felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected her father's name to come up in what she'd thought was a simple range evaluation. "He died when I was 8, Master Chief. Fallujah, 2004. "I know, I was at his funeral." Callahan's voice carried weight of old grief. "He wrote me a letter before that deployment, said if anything happened I should watch for his daughter, said you had the talent, that he'd started teaching you the old techniques." Reeves couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. "I never found you," Callahan continued. "Tried for years but couldn't locate you in the system. Didn't know you joined under a different command structure, worked your way up through Marine Scout Sniper School without anyone connecting you to Wyatt." He gestured at the rifle range stretching into the distance. "Show me what he taught you." The target at 2,000 meters was a standard silhouette. Reeves began her preparation ritual. Not the quick setup most modern snipers used, but the methodical process her father had drilled into her before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. She studied the grass movement at different distances, watched dust patterns, noted the way heat shimmered differently at various ranges, built a mental model of the wind between her position and the target. 3 distinct layers, each moving at different speeds and directions. She checked temperature at her position, then used visual cues to estimate temperature at the target. Calculated density altitude, adjusted for Coriolis' effect. Made notes in a worn field notebook that had belonged to her father, filled with calculations and observations from deployments she'd been too young to understand when he was alive. Brennan and Callahan watched in silence. What she was doing predated modern ballistic calculators by decades. This was the old craft, passed down through generations of snipers who'd learned that technology failed but knowledge endured. She settled into position behind the rifle, controlled her breathing, let the world narrow to the space between heartbeats, made final adjustments based on feel more than calculation. The shot felt perfect the moment she pressed the trigger. 2,000 meters downrange, the target showed impact, center mass. She reset, running through the process again, building a new wind model, adjusting calculations, making the 1,000 small decisions that turned theory into reality. 5 shots, 5 impacts, each 1 center mass with variations measured in inches rather than feet. Callahan approached her position, studying the target through a spotting scope. When he finally spoke, his voice carried emotion he didn't try to hide. Wyatt would be proud. He pulled out a weathered field notebook of his own. "These are the notes from Grenada, 1983. Admiral Brennan and I made a shot at 1,587 meters using techniques that weren't in any manual. Your father learned those techniques from me, refined them through multiple deployments, and apparently taught them to you before he died." He handed her the notebook, Compare his notes to yours. Reeves opened her father's notebook, then Callahan's. The handwriting was different, but the observations were nearly identical. Wind layer analysis, temperature differential calculations, atmospheric modeling techniques. The same knowledge passed forward across generations. The shot you made in Somalia, Callahan continued, 2690 meters. How did you know it was possible? Because my father's notes included calculations for shots beyond 3,000 meters, Reeves replied. He never made them operationally, but he'd done the theoretical work. Proved it was mathematically possible if you could account for all the variables. And you trusted 40-year-old handwritten calculations over modern ballistic computers. The computers said it was impossible, Master Chief. My father's notes said it was difficult but achievable. I trusted him. Brennan had been silent throughout the entire demonstration. Now he spoke, his voice carrying weight of decision that would reshape careers. Lieutenant Reeves, how would you like to stop analyzing intelligence reports and start teaching the next generation of snipers what your father taught you? But teaching wasn't just about passing forward knowledge. It was about proving that what seemed impossible was simply what no one else had been willing to measure correctly. The announcement came through official channels 3 weeks later. Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves was being assigned to develop and instruct an advanced long-range precision course. The curriculum would focus on extreme distance shooting techniques, combining traditional craft with modern technology. Selection would be restricted to the most qualified snipers from Marine Scout Sniper School, Navy SEAL Sniper Program, and Army Special Operations. The unofficial version, the one that circulated through the Special Operations community in whispers and speculation, was more interesting. Some lieutenant nobody had heard of was claiming she could teach shots beyond 2,500 meters, using techniques from the 1980s. Based on knowledge from a dead Marine sniper nobody remembered. The skepticism was thick enough to cut with a knife. 18 students arrived for the first course. 15 male, 3 female. All of them had made it through selection processes that eliminated 90% of candidates. All of them were confident in their abilities, comfortable with their training, certain they knew what precision shooting required. Reeves stood before them on the first day. The Grenada rifle, the one Brennan and Callahan had carried in 1983, positioned on a table at the front of the classroom. This rifle was carried by Admiral Brennan in 1983, she began. Then by Master Sergeant Wyatt Reeves through multiple combat deployments. Then by Master Chief Boone Callahan. Each of them made shots that seemed impossible at the time. Each of them passed forward knowledge that made those shots possible. She pulled out her father's field notebook, worn and stained and worth more than any technical manual. This notebook contains 40 years of field observations, wind patterns, atmospheric effects, calculations developed through experience rather than computers. Everything you need to know about extreme-range precision shooting is documented here, and none of it exists in the ballistic programs you've been trained on. A student raised his hand. Young SEAL, maybe 26, confidence radiating from every gesture. Ma'am, with respect, we've all been trained on the most advanced ballistic calculators available. We have rangefinders that account for temperature, pressure, humidity. Scopes with integrated ballistic compensation. Why would we need 40-year-old handwritten notes? Reeves had expected this, had prepared for it. Because technology fails, batteries die, electronics malfunction, weather creates conditions your calculator wasn't programmed for. And when that happens, when you're looking at a shot that needs to be made and all your technology is telling you it's impossible, you need to know the craft that predates the tools. She opened her father's notebook to a page filled with calculations and wind diagrams. My father made shots in Fallujah that his ballistic calculator said were impossible. He did it by understanding wind at a level that required observing thousands of shots across hundreds of conditions. by building mental models of atmospheric behavior that computers approximated but never fully captured. Another student spoke up. Female Marine, older than the SEAL, with the bearing of someone who'd seen actual combat. "What's the longest shot you've personally made, ma'am?" "Classified," Reeves replied. "But I can teach you the technique that made it possible. I can teach you to read wind without instruments, to sense atmospheric conditions through observation, to calculate shots that computers say are impossible." She saw skepticism in some faces, belief in others. It didn't matter. By the end of the course, they'd all understand. Over the following months, she taught them the old craft, how to study dust devils and vegetation movement to read wind layers, how temperature inversions affected bullet trajectory at extreme distances, how to build atmospheric models through observation rather than relying on instrumentation. She taught them that technology failed but knowledge endured. That mastery came from synthesis of science and art, calculation and intuition, tradition and innovation. The best students absorbed it like they were starving. The skeptics eventually came around when they made shots they'd thought impossible. One student in particular stood out. Young female Marine, 23 years old, who approached shooting with an intensity that reminded Reeves of herself at that age. She stayed late after every session, studying the field notebooks, asking questions that went beyond basic technique into the deeper understanding that separated competent shooters from true masters. "Ma'am," the student asked one day after class, "is it true you made a shot beyond 2,800 meters?" "I can't confirm operational details," Reeves replied carefully, "but I can teach you how to make one when it matters." The student nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "My grandfather was a sniper, Gulf War, then Somalia. He said the old techniques are the foundation everything else builds on, that computers are tools but mastery comes from something deeper." "What was his name?" "Master Chief Boone Callahan, ma'am. He's why I joined. And he told me to find you, said you'd teach me what he taught my father." Reeves felt time collapse in on itself. Callahan's son had died in Afghanistan at 25, but he'd had a daughter who grew up and joined the Marines and sought out the woman her grandfather had served with. The circle was closing, the chain was extending. "Your grandfather is one of the finest warriors I've ever known," Reeves said quietly. "He taught me things that saved my life more times than I can count. I'll teach you the same things. Make sure they survive another generation." And that's when she learned the hardest truth about knowledge. It's not enough to possess it. You have to be willing to prove it can extend beyond what anyone thought possible. 6 months into the advanced course, the call came through channels that didn't officially exist. Captain Blake, intelligence liaison for operations that never appeared in official records. His voice carried the weight of classified urgency. "We have a situation. High-value target, remote terrain, estimated range, 2,800 meters." Reeves felt her pulse quicken. Estimated. Surveyor puts it at 2795 plus or minus 50 meters. Variable wind conditions. Temperature differential between shooting position and target is significant. Atmospheric instability. Target exposure time approximately 45 seconds during a scheduled meeting. "What's the timeline?" 72 hours to mission execution, if you're interested." Reeves thought about her father, about Callahan and Brennan, about the student who was Callahan's granddaughter, watching her every day, learning the craft that had survived across generations. "I'll need access to the target area intelligence, topographical data, atmospheric modeling for the past 6 months, and I'll need to brief the mission commander personally." "Understood. One more thing." Blake paused. "There's a contingency plan involving a drone strike if the sniper shot isn't viable. A lot of people are expecting this to be another Somalia, another impossible shot that makes analysts nervous." "Tell them not to bother with the drone package. The shot's viable. You haven't even seen the location yet. I don't need to. If my father's calculations say it's possible at 3,000 meters, then 2795 is well within capability. I just need to account for the variables correctly. 72 hours later, Reeves was in position. The shooting platform was a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley that stretched into the distance like a painting done in shades of brown and gold. The target compound sat on the opposite ridge, barely visible to the naked eye. 2,795 meters, confirmed by laser rangefinder. She began her preparation ritual, the same process her father had taught her, the same techniques Callahan had taught him, the same craft that had survived from Grenada through Desert Storm through Fallujah and Somalia and Syria. She studied the vegetation at different ranges, watching how grass and scrub moved in layers, built a wind model that showed 3 distinct patterns between her position and the target, noted temperature readings at her location, used visual cues and atmospheric observation to estimate conditions at the target. Calculated density altitude, adjusted for Coriolis effect at this range and latitude, factored in the angle of the shot, the rotation of the Earth during bullet flight time, the way air density changed with elevation and temperature. She made notes in her father's field notebook, the same notebook he'd carried in Fallujah, the same calculations he'd developed through years of observation and experience and shots that had mattered more than life itself. The math said the shot was possible, difficult but possible. She settled into position behind the M17, the rifle that had belonged to Brennan and Callahan, the rifle that carried the legacy of shots that had seemed impossible until someone refused to accept that limitation. Controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, felt the wind on her face and cross-checked it against what she'd observed in the vegetation downrange, made final micro-adjustments to elevation and windage based on feel more than calculation. The target appeared in the compound exactly on schedule. 45 seconds of exposure during a meeting that intelligence had been tracking for 3 weeks. She had one shot, one opportunity to prove that her father's knowledge, Callahan's teaching, Brennan's faith, and her own dedication to the craft had produced something that exceeded what computers said was possible. The trigger press felt perfect. No hesitation, no doubt, just the smooth release that came from 10,000 practice repetitions and the absolute certainty that she'd accounted for every variable correctly. Time seemed to stretch. 3.5 seconds of bullet flight time. 3.5 seconds of watching through the scope, tracking the impact point, knowing that the math was right but that mathematics and reality sometimes diverged in ways that no calculation could predict. The target dropped, center mass, confirmed elimination. 2,795 meters. Under conditions that would have made most snipers request the drone strike option. She'd made the shot using techniques that predated computers by 40 years, proved that knowledge passed forward across generations, refined through experience and observation and dedication to craft, could achieve what technology alone said was impossible. The extraction team confirmed target elimination, mission complete, no secondary options needed. Reeves packed her gear with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear or adrenaline, but from the weight of knowing she just validated everything her father had believed, everything Callahan had taught, everything that 3 generations of warriors had preserved and passed forward. The real question was never whether she could make the shot. It was what that shot meant for everyone who came after. 3 weeks later, Admiral Brennan stood before a joint session of Special Operations Command leadership. The briefing room was packed with officers who made decisions about doctrine, training, and operational capabilities. Most of them believed that modern ballistic computers and advanced optics had rendered traditional fieldcraft obsolete. Brennan was about to change their minds. 2,795 meters, he began, pulling up mission imagery on the main display. Lieutenant Caitlin Reeves made this shot 3 weeks ago using calculations performed manually with techniques that date back to the Cold War. No ballistic calculator, no computer assistance, just knowledge passed forward across 3 generations of snipers. He clicked to the next slide. Side-by-side comparison of computer ballistic predictions versus Reeves' handwritten calculations. The computer said the shot had a 12% probability of success. Recommended drone strike as primary option. Lieutenant Reeves' manual calculations put the probability at 78%, assuming she could account for wind layers correctly. Murmurs around the room, officers exchanging glances. She made the shot on her first trigger pull, center mass, mission complete. Brennan let that sink in before continuing. This isn't an argument against technology. It's a recognition that we've become over-reliant on tools at the expense of foundational knowledge. We've created a generation of snipers who can operate ballistic calculators, but who don't understand the underlying atmospheric physics those calculators approximate. He pulled up another slide, training curriculum comparison. In 1985, Sniper School included 6 weeks of atmospheric observation and manual calculation before students ever touched a ballistic computer. By 2010, that had been reduced to 2 weeks. Current curriculum allocates 4 days to manual calculation, treating it as historical context rather than essential skill. More images. Field notebooks from Grenada, Desert Storm, Fallujah. Handwritten observations and calculations that had enabled shots at ranges that shouldn't have been possible. This is institutional knowledge that we're systematically erasing in favor of technology that works beautifully until it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, when environmental conditions exceed programmed parameters or equipment fails in the field, we have snipers who lack the foundational understanding to make critical shots manually. A colonel from Army Special Operations raised his hand. Admiral, with respect, are you suggesting we abandon ballistic calculators and return to 1980s methodology? I'm suggesting we stop treating them as mutually exclusive, Brennan replied. The best approach synthesizes both. Teach the foundational craft thoroughly, then introduce technology as enhancement rather than replacement. Create snipers who understand the physics deeply enough that they can operate with or without computers. He clicked to final slide. Course proposal for advanced long-range precision training. Lieutenant Reeves has developed curriculum that does exactly that. 6 months of intensive training covering atmospheric observation, manual ballistic calculation, wind reading at extreme distances, and integration of traditional craft with modern technology. Initial results from the first class are exceptional. He pulled up performance data. Students who'd completed Reeves' course were making shots at ranges 20 to 30% beyond what their previous training had enabled. More importantly, they were doing it with higher first-shot hit probability under adverse conditions. The knowledge exists, Brennan concluded. It survived because warriors like Master Chief Callahan and Master Sergeant Wyatt Reeves refused to let it die. Now Lieutenant Reeves is passing it forward to a new generation. The question is whether we're going to support that effort or continue pretending that technology alone is sufficient. The briefing ended with authorization to expand the advanced course, increase student capacity, develop formal curriculum that could be integrated across all special operations sniper programs. But the real victory came later in Brennan's office when he handed Reeves a weathered shadow box. Inside was a photograph from Grenada, 1983. 3 young warriors standing next to an M107 Barrett. Brennan, Callahan, and a third man Reeves recognized from old family photos. Her father, Wyatt Reeves. We were impossibly young, Brennan said quietly, and we thought we were immortal, your father, Master Chief Callahan, and me. Reeves took the shadow box with hands that trembled slightly. "He wrote me a letter before his last deployment," Brennan continued, pulling out an envelope yellowed with age. "Said if anything happened, I should watch over his daughter, teach her what we learned, make sure the knowledge survived." He handed her the letter. Reeves opened it with careful reverence, seeing her father's handwriting. Words written 20 years ago by a warrior who knew he might not come home. "Garrett, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Watch over my kid. She's got the talent, the dedication, everything we had at that age. Teach her what we learned in Grenada. The old ways matter. They'll matter long after we're dust. Make sure they survive. Wyatt." Reeves couldn't speak, couldn't process the weight of knowing her father had planned for this moment 2 decades before it arrived. "I failed him for 18 years, Brennan said. Couldn't find you. Didn't know you joined the military under a different command structure, but I found you eventually, and I kept my promise. The knowledge survived." Callahan entered the office now in civilian clothes, retirement official. He carried a weathered rifle case. "I'm too old for this now," he said simply, setting the case on Brennan's desk. "It belongs with you." Reeves opened the case. Inside was an M107 Barrett, older than the one she carried but meticulously maintained. The stock bore engraving, "Brennan, Callahan, Reeves, Grenada 1983, 1587M. "The skill outlives the shooter," Callahan said. "That's the tradition. Your father carried it after Grenada. I carried it after him. Now you carry it forward." Reeves traced the engraving, feeling the connection across decades. 3 names, 3 generations, one unbroken chain of knowledge and skill and the weight of shots that mattered. "I don't know if I can." "You already did," Brennan interrupted. 2795 meters. You proved the knowledge survives. Now teach it to others. Make sure it outlives all of us. The Advanced Long-Range Precision course began its second iteration 3 months later. 18 new students, drawn from the most elite units in American Special Operations. They arrived with confidence born of making it through selection processes that eliminated most candidates. And they met an instructor who carried a rifle engraved with 3 names and a distance that represented not just a shot, but a legacy. Reeves stood before them on the first day, the Grenada rifle positioned on the table. This rifle was carried by warriors who refused to accept that impossible was anything more than a measurement no one had bothered to calculate correctly, she began. They made shots that defied belief. Then they passed forward the knowledge that made those shots possible. She pulled out her father's field notebook, worn and stained, and containing wisdom that no computer could replicate. "You're here because someone believes you have the talent to carry this forward, to learn the craft that predates technology, to become the kind of shooter who can make critical shots when everything else fails." A student raised her hand, the same young Marine who was Callahan's granddaughter, who'd excelled in the first course and returned as assistant instructor. "Ma'am, for the new students who don't know, can you explain why manual calculation matters when we have advanced ballistic computers?" Reeves smiled slightly. The question was planted, designed to address the skepticism she saw in several faces. "Because knowledge is the foundation. Technology is the tool, and foundations outlive tools every single time." She opened the notebook to calculations her father had made in Fallujah, 2 weeks before he died. "These calculations enabled my father to make shots that saved lives under conditions where his ballistic calculator failed. The knowledge survived his death, was passed to me, and enabled shots that saved different lives in different wars. Now I'm passing it to you, not to replace your technology, but to give you the foundation that makes you capable with or without it." Over the months that followed, she taught them the craft, how to read wind in layers, how to build atmospheric models through observation, how to calculate shots manually with precision that approximated what computers achieved through different methods. Some students struggled initially, uncomfortable with techniques that required patience and observation rather than quick technological solutions. Others absorbed the knowledge hungrily, recognizing that they were learning something rare and valuable. All of them eventually made shots they hadn't thought possible. The course graduated its second class with honors, then its third, then its fourth, each class producing snipers who understood both the old craft and modern technology, who could operate at the highest level with or without computers, who carried forward knowledge that had survived across generations. And late at night, when the ranges were empty, Reeves would sometimes drive out to the long-range facility, set up at the 2,500-meter line with the Grenada rifle, go through the familiar ritual of preparation. The shots were always perfect, center mass every time. She'd sit there as the sun set, thinking about her father and Brennan and Callahan, thinking about the students who were learning the craft, thinking about the chain extending forward into battles not yet imagined. Her phone would sometimes buzz with mission notifications, new targets, remote terrain, distances that made analysts nervous. She didn't take those missions anymore. Didn't need to. She'd proven what needed proving, made the shots that mattered. Now her role was passing forward the knowledge that made such shots possible. But she kept the rifle ready, maintained it with the same devotion her father had shown, because some knowledge was too valuable to lose, too hard-won to abandon, too essential to forget. And because there would always be a shot that needed to be made, always be a distance that seemed impossible, always be someone who needed to prove that impossible was just what no one else had measured correctly. The bullet doesn't lie. The shooter just has to be good enough to let it tell the truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.